Howdy, Immortalium here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Ghost in the Shell 1.5, Human Error Processor. So, as you might imagine, when I heard the title of this manga, I was a bit confused. Ghost in the Shell 1.5? What does that mean? I mean, Ghost in the Shell 2, I would understand, that's a sequel to the original Ghost in the Shell. But what does a 1.5 mean? And after doing some research, the gist that I kind of got was that this was a collection of short stories to do with Section 9, which is the group that combats cyber terrorism in Japan, from the original Ghost in the Shell. And it's set, of course, after the events of the original Ghost in the Shell. Of course, the question is, as always, is it any good? And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So let's get started. So what is the story of Ghost in the Shell 1.5? Ghost in the Shell 1.5 opens up with a woman talking to Aramaki, informing him that her father has been acting a bit unusual, and a relatively new recruit to Section 9, Azuma, makes the point that he believes that the father may in fact be dead. The woman, understandably, thinks that he's making fun of her and is about to leave when Aramaki informs her that he is in fact not joking, and that there have been several cases recently where people who are deceased are being remote controlled and are walking around as if they're living, but they are in fact dead. And so, as you might imagine, they begin looking into this case. And that's how the story begins. Now, the way I was sold on this manga was that this was a short story collection, but I think this is slightly different than that. While it's true that many of the cases that they come across are quite episodic, nonetheless they form this kind of overarching narrative to do with this remote hacker hacking bodies and making them move in order to serve their bidding. And in general, I actually quite enjoyed these stories. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that I actually prefer Ghost in the Shell 1.5 over the original Ghost in the Shell manga, which I reviewed recently, which might surprise some people, but there's a couple of reasons for that. For one, I found the individual stories themselves to be quite interesting, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised when I found out that this was in fact an overarching narrative, which honestly I wasn't expecting. Admittedly, there was something that happened near the end of the manga, but still I didn't feel like it was as conclusive as it could have been, and so I was a little bit disappointed by that. Another thing that I think is actually better handled here than in the original Ghost in the Shell is the humor. When I began reading the original Ghost in the Shell, I was a bit taken aback by the humor, which was pretty standard for Shiro Masamune compared to many of the other manga that I'd read from him, but compared to all of the other Ghost in the Shell adaptations that I'd watched, in which they were very serious, very dour, and generally had no comedy, I was quite taken aback. And while comedy is still present here, I do feel that the humor here is better integrated. It doesn't stand out as much to me as the humor did in the first Ghost in the Shell manga. Now, something that's probably worth noting in this, because it is kind of unusual considering it is Ghost in the Shell, is that the Major isn't in the story as much as you would probably expect. She does make an appearance or two, but predominantly this is a story about the characters from Section 9, the ones that remained after the events of the first Ghost in the Shell manga. And of course I found them as enjoyable as ever. Of course I love Togusa, I love Bato, and I actually quite liked the new edition of Azuma, who I wasn't actually that familiar with. Turns out he was in several anime adaptations, but I never took particular note of him. But he lended a kind of a pleasant energy to the story, so I did quite enjoy his inclusion. So overall, I actually enjoyed this quite a bit. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that all the Shiro Masamune manga I've read, which admittedly isn't that much, that this is my favorite thing that I've read from him. I still think it is quite flawed. As I mentioned before, I thought the conclusion to this was a little lacking, and even though the stories themselves are quite interesting, none of them, as far as I'm concerned, are like outstanding. They're just very pleasant to read and of a good quality. With regards to the artwork, now the artwork here is a little different to the original Ghost in the Shell. These manga chapters were published over the course of years. And while the earlier chapters in the manga do have a more similar look to the artwork from the original Ghost in the Shell manga, the artwork for the last two stories, which were published quite a few years after the end of the original Ghost in the Shell, had a much more refined look as far as I'm concerned. The characters looked sharper, the artwork didn't feel quite as cluttered, which was something that Shiro Masamune seemed to have been working on for quite a while. I noticed that character designs were more consistently on model, so I was pretty happy with that. There are also some color pages here which are quite beautiful. I really do love the way that Shiro Masamune handles color, so of course I was glad to see that the color pages were included in this release. And speaking of that, I think it's time to discuss the way that Kodansha released this. So of course this is the English Deluxe Edition, and of course if we compare it to my trusty Yotsuba, you will see that it's absolutely massive compared to your standard tankobon. It is the same size as the original Ghost in the Shell manga release from Kodansha. The paper quality here is very, very good, just like the first Ghost in the Shell release. The pages are very clean, they really allow the black and white artwork to stand out, and they allow the color pages to be quite vivid. And in terms of extras, I mentioned of course the color pages before, which I really, really do like. But something that I found really, really interesting was after reading the stories, there is what Shiro Masamune calls a story commentary at the back. And in this story commentary, he explains a little bit about why he wanted to make this manga, and he then gives some kind of details on each of the individual stories in this manga. There's 4 chapters in total, so he spends a little bit of time just discussing each one. And there's some very good information here, and I quite enjoyed it. I thought that was a great inclusion as an extra in this deluxe release. And a little bit hidden, but after the special effects index, there is actually a little afterword from Shiro Masamune. So in terms of how Kodansha released this book, I do have to say that they did an exceptional job with it again, just like the first Ghost in the Shell. I guess the important thing to mention though is that this book is quite a bit shorter than the original Ghost in the Shell. But overall, I was very happy with the way that Kodansha released this manga. So overall, what are my thoughts on Ghost in the Shell 1.5 Human Error Processor? I actually found myself quite enjoying this manga after being a bit let down by the first Ghost in the Shell. And I think if you are a Ghost in the Shell fan, or you're a fan of cyberpunk manga, I think you owe it to yourself to pick up this release. It's very interesting. It covers a few stories that kind of weren't really adapted into Ghost in the Shell anime, which in and of itself is always a fascinating thing. Now, of course, I'd always love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this manga. Have you read Ghost in the Shell 1.5 Human Error Processor? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What were your thoughts on it compared to the first Ghost in the Shell manga? What are your thoughts on the way that Kodansha released this manga? Are you happy with it? Was there anything that you thought that should have been added to this release? And of course, if you have anything else you want to say about Ghost in the Shell, about Shiro Masamune, about specifically Ghost in the Shell 1.5, leave all that in the comments below. And of course, if you want to support the channel, I would encourage you to use my Amazon affiliate links as well as my brand new Right Stuff affiliate link in the description below. When you purchase an anime and manga through those affiliate links, not only are you supporting me, not only are you supporting the channel, but you're also supporting the anime and manga industry. So I would highly encourage you to use those affiliate links when you purchase your anime and manga. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.